Hi guys, it's Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up and book haul for you guys. November was a better reading month for me than October was, but I still didn't get the chance to read as much as I would have loved to. Buzzwordathon was in November, and that's the only occasion I had to read as much as I wanted to, so most of my reading was done during that week for that readathon. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the books that I read this month, so without further ado, let's jump into my wrap-up. The first book that I read in November is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a book that I have been meaning to read for almost a year. I think I bought it last October or last November, so I've had it for about a year on my shelves. So this has been a very, very overdue read, but in my defense, I was waiting until we got closer to the release of The Queen of Nothing to read it, so I didn't have to wait too long between me reading this and The Wicked King and then the release of Queen of Nothing. If you don't know what The Cruel Prince is about, it's about this girl named Jude, and she has a sister named Vivienne and a sister named Taryn, and when they were all younger, their parents were assassinated by a fairy general. That fairy general turned out to be Vivienne's real father, so after he killed their parents, he took all three girls back to Elfame with them, which is where he and the rest of the fairy species live. And on top of that, Jude and Taryn were raised as fairies, even though they weren't fairy by blood. So this book takes place many, many, many years after the said murdering and kidnapping of these girls, and this story is about them trying to find their place in the fairy community as they grow older. And Jude and Taryn are twin sisters, by the way, I forgot to mention that, but they both want to fit in, and they have two different ways of going about it. So one is very loud-mouthed and very sassy and also very strong-willed, and the other one's a bit more shy, a bit more quiet, much more the type of person to, just keep quiet, keep your head down, and try not to be noticed, whereas Jude is the complete opposite. On top of following Jude and Taryn's story, this book follows Cardan, who is a prince, and he's very, very cruel, but that's because of his upbringing. It follows him and court life, and there's a bunch of royalty stuff. This series is unlike anything I've ever read before. I absolutely adored it. I read in the past the Throne of Glass series and the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas, and her interpretation of fairies is very, very different. And I think I like Holly Black's interpretation of fairies more, so I just find the world really interesting and how their politics work and also how the world works and all of that stuff. It's a lot more focused on the actual fairies than magic. I don't know if you guys kind of understand my train of thought, but it's a lot more on the creatures themselves than like the magic of this world. That is the case with Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. So my rating for The Cruel Prince was a 4.5. There were a couple of things that annoyed me. One was that the beginning was kind of slow. It took me a little while to get through the first third of the book, but after I passed that point, I just flew through the rest. I think I read nearly 200 pages of this in a single day, so that gives you an idea. So yes, the first book that I read in November is The Cruel Prince. You might already be able to guess my second read of November, and that is The Wicked King by Holly Black. I loved this book just as much as I loved The Cruel Prince. This was a 4-star rating though, because there are things that annoyed me with this book as well, but I think the ending greatly made up for it. The ending to this book broke me like no other book I've read before. So this was a very fast-paced novel. It didn't take me nearly as long to get into as The Cruel Prince did. I just started it, and before I knew it, I had read 100 pages of it. I think it also helps that The Wicked King is shorter than The Cruel Prince, so maybe that's why. So The Wicked King was book 2 of November, and it was a 4-star read. The next book that I read in November is Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen McManus. This is the second book by Karen McManus that I have read recently, and I really like her writing. It's super easy to read. It's a fast-paced kind of storytelling that's descriptive, but not too descriptive that you kind of lose your train of thought as you're reading the book. So if you don't know what Two Can Keep a Secret is about, it's about this girl named Ellery, and she has a twin brother, and they both moved to Vermont after their mother was sent to rehab. They're staying in their mom's old hometown with their grandmother, and a lot of weird things have happened in this town in Vermont. So a really long time ago, a girl was murdered, and then a girl went missing. Nobody really knew what happened. No one really knows who did it. Since this whole thing was years and years ago, people kind of moved on with their lives and thought that the whole thing was over. But as soon as Ezra and Ellery move to this town in Vermont, new threats surface. So there's this anonymous person who is threatening to harm another girl the same way that the girls in the past were harmed, and Ellery finds herself smack dab in the middle of it. So this whole book is about the mystery of what happened to those girls in the past and who is going to be the next victim and who is actually behind all of this. Is it the same person? Is it two completely unrelated cases or a copycat? So that's the gist of the story. Now on to my thoughts. I gave this a 4-star. It was a very, very interesting read, but yet again, I felt like it took me a little while to get into. The world building at the beginning of the novel was just like a tad slow for me, but I looked past that because the rest of the book was just amazing. I didn't foresee the ending coming, but I am kind of a little bit disappointed with who the bad guy ended up being. The author set us up for this big reveal, and I was really, really loving the direction the story was going. And when the twist showed up, I was like, really? That person? Okay. In all honesty, I think I would have preferred the ending that she was setting us up to believe was the actual ending instead of the ending we got. But the ending was still a really great ending. It was unexpected, and the number one thing that I look for in mystery thrillers is an unpredictable ending, because yes, mystery and thriller books are fun, but they're no fun if you see the ending coming from a mile away. All in all, this was a very enjoyable read, and it got a 4-star rating from me. The last book that I read in November is probably going to end up being on my favorite books of 2019 list, along with the Folk of the Air trilogy, and that book is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray, which is book 1 in the Firebird trilogy. I didn't know that that trilogy actually had a name. Learn something new. If you don't know what this book is about, 1,000 Pieces of You follows this girl named Marguerite, and she is a very artsy type person, and her whole family is a family of scientists. Her parents were physicists, and they made a huge breakthrough in their research. So their research was interdimensional travel. So they managed to create a device that would allow your consciousness to be transported into another version of yourself that's in another dimension. The how and all of that stuff is explained in like the first 50 pages of this book, but the gist of it is that in the world there are a bunch of other parallel dimensions, and the way they come to be is that when you're faced with a choice, you make your decision based off of the options you have, and the other options that you didn't choose end up being different dimensions. So every time you're at a crossroads and you have a decision, well, you go one way and the option that you didn't end up choosing becomes splintered into its own dimension. It's kind of a tough thing to explain. The book does it a lot better than me. The other thing worth mentioning with interdimensional travel is that it's only your consciousness that can travel between dimensions. So your consciousness has to find a host. So obviously it'll find your other self in that dimension, meaning that if you don't exist in a dimension, you can't travel to that dimension. So, with that out of the way, our character Marguerite is traveling through different dimensions because something happened in her family and something happened to her parents' research. So she's traveling through the dimensions to find the person who is responsible for all of that, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's really amazing. There was also a teeny tiny love triangle situation, but if I'm to be honest, it wasn't as bad as some of the other love triangles I've read in other books. So, it was tolerable. But all in all, I really enjoyed this book because I love the fact that the sci-fi aspect of this book was anchored into the real world. I don't like sci-fi books that are too futuristic and too disconnected from the real world. Those are the types of sci-fi books that I have the most trouble getting into. So for this book to be kind of set in our world, but just with parallel dimensions of our world, it kind of made it a bit easier for me to read, and also it made it easier for me to love. Sci-fi is one of my least read genres because I feel like I can't connect to the content as much, but I had no problem connecting with the characters. And also the concept of this book was really, really interesting and unlike anything I've ever read before. I loved this book so much that I ended up reading 95% of it in a single day. So if that doesn't tell you how I feel about this book, then I don't know what will. So there you have it. These are the 4 books that I read in November of this year. If you guys are interested, I have a vlog posted for Buzzwordathon where I read all of these 4 books so you can see my reactions, my thoughts and stuff as I'm reading them. So if that interests you, I will leave the link to that video down below. Now that my November reads are out of the way, let's get into the book haul portion of this video. If you guys didn't know this already, I live in Canada, so at the end of November, I traveled to the United States with my family to go spend American Thanksgiving with my aunt who lives in New York. So, obviously, since I was in the US, I had to stop by a Barnes & Noble. I actually went to 2 different Barnes & Noble locations, and I will tell you why in a second. But at the first Barnes & Noble location that I visited, I ended up picking up The Dark Vault by Victoria Schwab. So if you guys don't know what this is, it's a bind-up of The Archived and The Unbound. So it's that duology by Victoria Schwab that has been published for a few years now already, and that I've been meaning to read for so long. But I've never been able to find the books until now. I had no idea that they had been published as a bind-up. So I was really ecstatic when I managed to find a copy of the bind-up at the Barnes & Noble that I visited. Another thing that's really interesting about this copy is that it has a bonus short story, so it isn't published with the regular books. I don't think it is anyway. So that was the first book that I got in November. The last book that I bought in November is the one that I was the most excited for, and it was really the only thing that I wanted to buy in the US before coming back home to Canada, and that book is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, and not only is it the exclusive edition, but I found a signed copy. So like I just mentioned, I read The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King in November to prepare for the release of The Queen of Nothing, and as soon as I finished The Wicked King, I was going to buy a copy of The Queen of Nothing, but then I told myself that if I could hold out for a few more days, I'll be able to purchase a Barnes & Noble exclusive edition of this book. Now, before I went to the US, I went online on the Barnes & Noble website to check if they had an exclusive edition and if they had a signed exclusive edition, and they did. So when I went to the first Barnes & Noble location, I found an exclusive edition, no problem, but it wasn't signed and they didn't have any signed editions available. So obviously what I did was go on the Barnes & Noble website and find a store that was near me that had the signed edition in stock. So after a few phone calls, I managed to find a signed copy of The Queen of Nothing, and my family and I drove out to go pick it up. I'm really happy to have this in my hands. Living in Canada, not many authors visit my province, so I rarely get my hands on signed editions. I only have 2 signed editions, my A Gathering of Shadows Collector's Edition that has V.E. Schwab's signature in it, and also my signed edition of Two Dark Reigns by Kendar Blake, and that's it. So you can bet that I am very happy to be adding this to my signed books collection, especially since I love this trilogy so much. So there you have it. That is my very small November book haul. I didn't buy many books because Christmas is coming up, and I made the mistake last year of buying myself a book that I wanted too close to Christmas, and my mother had actually bought me that book, so she had to return it and get me something else. So I am avoiding doing that this year again, so I only bought these 2 babies, and for any other book purchases, I'm going to wait until after Christmas. So that is it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. You can let me know by giving this video a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've read and what your opinions and thoughts were on them, and also if you've read any of the books that I hauled this month and what your thoughts on them were as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button down below so you never miss a future upload of mine. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys!